Do you even know what you're doing to me right now? She asked, voice low, eyes locked on mine. Hello, I'm Daniel. I'm 35, and for 3 years I've worked under Margaret Chun, my boss. My mentor. The woman I promised myself I'd never cross that line with. I've always been the kind of man who keeps his distance, who waits instead of rushes in. But that Thursday night, the office empty, the lights dimmed to gold. She stood close enough for me to catch the scent of jasmine and something else, hesitation. My hand rested over hers, and neither of us moved. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. I'd watched Margaret Chen command boardrooms for 3 years. But I'd never seen her like this. In the corporate world of strategic planning, she was our North Star, brilliant, composed, and always 3 steps ahead. From my first day as a junior analyst, I knew I was in the presence of someone exceptional. You know those rare people who can silence a room just by entering it? That was Margaret. Not through intimidation, but through this quiet, magnetic authority that drew everyone's attention naturally. When she spoke, even the most jaded executives leaned forward in their chairs. I learned early to keep a careful, professional distance. Not just because she was my boss's boss, but because admiring someone's mind that much can be dangerous in its own way. So I built walls of polite efficiency around my growing respect for her. I made sure our interactions stayed within the safe boundaries of quarterly reports and project updates. The fluorescent lights had dimmed to their evening setting that Thursday in October, casting long shadows across my cramped office. Most of the floor was empty. That peculiar kind of corporate quiet where you can hear the hum of the climate control and the occasional ding of a distant elevator at 7 o'clock. I looked up to find Margaret in my doorway. She had her laptop tucked under one arm and clutched a thick folder of quarterly projections. Something was different. The usual steel in her posture had softened slightly, and her reading glasses were pushed up into her dark hair, something she only did when Mai said, "Why Sue?" When Mai says, "Why Sue?" says, but lies on. Why Sue says, when Mai said lies last, long-lasting color. Then Why Sue said, "Why said my Sue said, my Sue said, I be out, my Sue said, my Why Sue's, my Mai said, they are so might. My Sue said, my Sue said, Why Sue said, Why Sue say sev, I make less, with so Mike it says, why lied of it, to consist call it, where so it's like by we sesik I kikes it's we see it guide sick to sit to week I to you to I date it's it look sit to city plean was sick sit to cook out to lab cast it's this scrot to pay it be say place in it with us deeply preoccupied. Do you have a few hours? She asked, and I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers as she adjusted her grip on the folder. The board presentation tomorrow. ... She paused, and I saw something I'd never witnessed before: uncertainty. The Margaret Chen I knew never showed vulnerability. She was the one who stayed late perfecting other people's presentations, not the one seeking help. But here she was, standing in my doorway with an uncharacteristic hesitation in her voice. You know that stillness before a storm? When the air pressure shifts and even the birds go quiet. That's what it felt like in my office at that moment. Something fundamental was changing in the space between us, though I couldn't yet name what it was. Of course, I said, moving some papers aside to make room. I'd be happy to help. She entered my office then, her heels clicking softly on the industrial carpet. The subtle scent of her perfume, something elegant and understated, drifted across my desk as she set down her materials. I watched as she spread out the presentation drafts. Her normally precise movements slightly less controlled than usual. This wasn't our VP of strategic planning anymore. This was Margaret Chen, brilliant. but human, showing me a side of herself I'd never been allowed to see. And despite all my careful boundaries, despite 3 years of maintaining professional distance, I felt something shift inside me too. I kept my voice steady as I asked, "Where would you like to start?" But I knew, somehow, that we were beginning something that had nothing to do with tomorrow's board presentation. She settled into the chair across from me, reaching up to pull her glasses back down from her hair. "The growth projections," she said, spreading out a series of charts. "Something's not adding up, and I can't afford to be wrong. Not tomorrow." The weight in her voice caught me off guard. I'd seen Margaret handle billion-dollar decisions with less apparent concern. Whatever was really troubling her, I suspected it went deeper than numerical forecasts and presentation slides. "Let's move to the conference room," Margaret suggested, gathering the spread of papers. "We'll need more space to lay everything out." I followed her down the hallway, our footsteps echoing in the emptying office. Through the glass walls, I could see the last few colleagues packing up their things, nodding goodbyes as they headed for the elevators. The sky outside had deepened to indigo, city lights beginning to twinkle against the October darkness. The automated lighting system clicked over to evening mode as we entered the conference room, washing everything in a warmer glow that softened the usual corporate sterility. It was the kind of lighting that made everything feel a bit less formal, a bit more human. Margaret set her materials down on the long table and began arranging them with practiced efficiency. I watched as she reached up to loosen the silk scarf at her throat, a gesture so casual, yet somehow startlingly intimate. She rolled her sleeves with precise movements, each fold exactly even, until they rested just above her elbows. I'd never noticed her wrists before, delicate despite her commanding presence. With a thin gold watch that caught the light as she moved. It was strange how 3 years of daily interactions hadn't prepared me for these small discoveries. We fell into a rhythm naturally. I took charge of restructuring the presentation slides while Margaret refined her talking points, marking up her notes with swift, decisive strokes of her pen. Our usual formal communication dissolved into something more efficient, more intimate, really. Half-finished sentences that the other somehow understood completely. Quick gestures that conveyed entire concepts. The occasional glance that carried a whole conversation's worth of meaning. If we move the market analysis, I would begin. Yes, right after the competitive landscape, she'd finish, already nodding. And then the 3-year projection. Perfect. A quick smile, a finger tapping the relevant chart. I found myself growing hyper-aware of her movements, the way she tucked loose strands of hair behind her ear when deep in thought, how she pressed her lips together slightly before making a decision. These weren't things I should have been noticing about Margaret Chen, VP of Strategic Planning. But in this softer light, with the quiet of evening settling around us, those carefully maintained professional walls began to crack. The corporate mask she wore so effortlessly during the day had slipped just slightly, revealing glimpses of the woman beneath. She was still brilliant, still focused, but there was something less guarded in her expressions. Something more real in her quiet sighs of frustration when a particular section wasn't working. I checked my watch, approaching 9 o'clock. We'd been at this for nearly 2 hours, but it felt both longer and shorter somehow. Time behaves strangely when you're existing in this kind of bubble, where the normal rules of hierarchy and professional distance have begun to blur around the edges. "We should probably take a break soon," I said, noting the tension in her shoulders. As she leaned over another spread of documents, she glanced up, and for a moment our eyes met across the table. Something flickered their acknowledgement, perhaps, of this subtle shift between us. Or maybe I was reading too much into these small moments, these tiny cracks in our carefully maintained professional facades. The rest of the office was completely silent now, except for the distant hum of the climate control system. Through the glass walls, I could see only darkness and the occasional glow of cleaning staff making their rounds on other floors. We were alone up here, in this warm pool of light, surrounded by spreadsheets and presentation slides that suddenly seemed less important than the quiet intimacy of the moment. Margaret rose from her chair with a barely suppressed groan, arching her back. Even in the soft evening light, I could see her wince as she tried to work out the stiffness from hours of being hunched over spreadsheets. Without thinking too much about it, I spoke up. We should get some dinner. The Thai place around the corner delivers until 11. She turned to me, absently massaging her shoulder. That might not be a bad idea. I haven't eaten since ... I could order your usual, I offered. Pad see, mild, no peanuts. Margaret's hand stilled on her shoulder. Her eyes widened slightly as she looked at me, really looked at me, and I realized what I'd just revealed, that I'd been paying attention all those times she'd ordered lunch during team meetings or working sessions. That I'd noticed this small detail about her preferences, filed it away somewhere in my mind. The moment stretched between us, delicate as spun sugar. I could almost see her processing this revelation, wondering perhaps what other details I might have collected over our years working together. She glanced away first, tucking that loose strand of hair behind her ear again. Yes, she said softly. That would be perfect, actually. I pulled out my phone and placed the order, adding my own usual curry to the ticket. While we waited, we kept working, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. The silence felt different now, less about professional focus and more about shared comfort in each other's presence. When the delivery arrived, I met the driver in the lobby and brought the food back up. The spicy sweet aroma filled the conference room, making me realize how hungry I actually was. Margaret was standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city lights. Should we take a break from the table? One suggested, holding up the bags. The view's better over there anyway. She nodded, and we set up our impromptu dinner by the window, standing side by side as we opened the containers. The city sprawled out below us, a glittering tapestry of lights and movement. From this high up, even the traffic looked peaceful, like streams of red and white flowing through dark canyons. My daughter would love this view, Margaret said suddenly, between careful bites of noodles. She's always had an eye for beautiful things like this. There was a note of something in her voice I'd never heard before, pride mixed with a gentle melancholy. She's at grad school now, working on her master's in architectural design. That must be exciting for her, I said, sensing she wanted to talk about it. It is. She's thriving there, doing exactly what she's always dreamed of. Margaret paused, using her chopsticks to rearrange some noodles. The house feels too quiet lately, though. It's strange how you don't realize how much noise one person brings to a space until they're gone. The admission hung in the air between us. I heard what she wasn't quite saying, the loneliness that lived in those quiet rooms, the adjustment to a different kind of solitude than the one she'd chosen for herself after her divorce. This wasn't the Margaret Chen who commanded boardrooms and steered million-dollar deals. This was someone else, someone allowing me a glimpse behind that polished exterior. She turned slightly toward me, her expression curious. What about you? I realize I don't know much about your life outside these walls. Her gesture encompassed the office around us. Do you have family in the city? The question was simple enough, but the way she asked it felt significant, like she was offering me the same opportunity for openness that she'd just shown. We stood there in the gentle darkness, city lights painting patterns across our faces, poised on the edge of something that felt a lot like friendship. The city lights glinted off. Margaret's dark hair as she told me about her daughter's latest project, a sustainable housing development that combined modern aesthetics with environmental consciousness. Her whole face softened when she spoke about her child's achievements, pride warming her usual controlled expression. She's always been that way, Margaret said, gesturing with her chopsticks. Even as a little girl, she'd build these incredible structures with her blocks, always thinking about how things could work better, be more beautiful. Sounds like someone else I know, I offered, thinking of how Margaret approached our corporate projects with that same drive for excellence and innovation. She smiled, ducking her head slightly at the comparison. What about you? How do you spend your time outside of spreadsheets and projections? Lately, I've been hiking a lot, I admitted, gathering up my empty container. There's something about being on a trail that helps clear my head. My apartment can get pretty quiet, too. Where do you go hiking? She asked, genuine interest in her voice. There's this trail system about an hour north. Nothing too challenging, but the views are worth it. Sometimes I pack a lunch and just sit at the summit, watching the clouds move over the valley. I paused, surprised by how easily the words came. It's peaceful up there. It's a different kind of quiet than an empty apartment. Margaret nodded, understanding. In her eyes, we cleaned up our dinner debris in comfortable silence. The earlier tension transformed into something more relaxed, more personal. When we returned to the presentation, our working rhythm had shifted subtly. The professional wall between us felt thinner somehow, more permeable. The next hour passed quickly as we refined the presentation. Around 10:30, Margaret frowned. At her laptop screen, I need to access the original marketing projections, she said, tapping her pen against the desk. They're stored locally on my desktop. She glanced at her watch, then at me. It would be faster if we just worked from my office, rather than waiting for email transfers. Would you mind? Not at all, I replied. Gathering my notebook and pen, she led the way down the darkened hallway, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. I'd only been in her corner office a handful of times over the years, usually for formal reviews or urgent meetings. Now, following her through the door, I've noticed details I'd missed before. The space perfectly reflected its occupant, meticulously organized but unexpectedly warm. A small lamp cast a gentle glow across her substantial desk. Along one wall, a credenza held several framed photographs. The largest showed her daughter in graduation robes, beaming at the camera with Margaret's smile. A potted orchid thrived on the windowsill, its delicate blooms stark white against the night sky beyond. Margaret moved behind her desk, pressing the power button on her computer. As the machine hummed to life, she pulled a second chair from the small conference table near the window. Here, she said, positioning it next to her own chair. It'll be easier to work through the files together. I hesitated for a moment, acutely aware of how this arrangement would place us. No conference. Table between us, no professional buffer zone. Just two chairs behind her desk, close enough that our elbows might brush as we worked. Margaret looked up at my pause, one eyebrow raised slightly in question. The lamplight caught the silver threads in her dark hair, and I noticed again how the evening had softened her usual corporate armor. Her silk scarf lay forgotten in the conference room. Her sleeves still rolled precisely to her elbows, revealing those delicate wrists I couldn't seem to stop noticing. Should I email the files instead? She asked, misreading my hesitation. No, I said quickly, moving toward the offered chair. This makes more sense. We're already here. As I settled into the seat beside her, I caught a hint of her perfume. Something subtle and elegant that I'd never been close enough to identify before. The screen brightened with her desktop display, and Margaret leaned forward to navigate through her folders, her shoulder nearly touching mine. The leather chair creaked softly as I settled in beside Margaret. Her desk, which had always seemed expansive during our reviews, now felt intimate, almost confining with both of us behind it. The usual safety of distance had vanished, replaced by a hyper-awareness of every small movement, every shared breath. Margaret leaned forward to navigate through her folders, her fingertips moving precisely across the keyboard. The lamp on her desk cast everything in warm amber, softening the edges of the moment. I tried to focus on the screen, but found myself cataloging details instead. The way her silk blouse whispered with each movement. Her shoulder hovered mere inches from mine. The subtle notes of what had to be jasmine perfume mingling with the lingering scent of coffee and that particular quality of air that belongs only to late nights in quiet offices. "Here are the original projections," she murmured, double-clicking a folder. "I want to emphasize these growth patterns specifically." Her cursor moved across several charts, each showing promising upward trends. "The board responds well to visual data, but we need to structure the narrative carefully." I nodded, watching as she pulled up another spreadsheet. "Those quarterly comparisons are compelling. We should lead with them." She hummed in agreement. Scrolling through the document, when she reached the bottom, she clicked over to a complex pivot table. I recognized it as one of our more troublesome reports, the kind that sometimes required specific sorting sequences to display correctly. Margaret clicked through several attempts to reorganize the data, but the table refused to cooperate. A small furrow appeared between her brows. The first crack in her composure I'd seen all evening. Without thinking, I reached over to help. My hand covered hers on the mouse, fingers curling naturally to guide the cursor. "Here, let me show you." The trick with this one, view? The words died in my throat as we both registered the contact. Her hand was warm beneath mine, slim fingers gone absolutely still under my touch. The office seemed to hold its breath, all sound reduced to the quiet hum of her computer and the distant pulse of the city below. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. I became aware of how her breathing had changed, grown shorter and less certain. My own heart picked up speed, marking seconds that stretched like hours. The jasmine scent seemed stronger now, or maybe it was just that I'd never been close enough to fully appreciate it before. The cursor blinked steadily on the screen, waiting for input. The pivot table sat unfinished. But in that suspended moment, work felt very far away. All I could focus on was the soft skin beneath my fingers, the slight tremor I felt in her hand, and the deafening sound of my own pulse in my ears. Margaret remained frozen, her profile illuminated by the screen's blue glow. I could see her pulse fluttering at the base of her throat where her scarf usually lay. The precise edge of her rolled sleeve pressed against my wrist. The air between us felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. A distant elevator chimed somewhere in the building, the sound barely penetrating our bubble of silence. Still, neither of us had moved. My hands still rested over hers, our fingers aligned on the mouse in a touch that had long since crossed the boundary from helpful to something else entirely. Her shallow breaths matched my own, creating a rhythm that seemed to exist outside of normal time. The city lights twinkled beyond her office windows, countless other lives playing out in distant buildings. But here, in this corner office 27, floors up, the world had narrowed to just this, the warmth of her hand under mine, the soft sound of her breathing, and the weight of everything we weren't saying. Daniel. My name left her lips with a weight I'd never heard before, not in project reviews, not in casual greetings, not in any of our countless professional exchanges. The sound of it pulled my gaze to her face, and I realized just how close we were. Close enough that I could see golden flecks in her brown eyes, catch the delicate lines at their corners, marks of laughter, worry, and years of experiences I knew nothing about. She didn't pull away. The air between us crackled with possibility, heavy with things unsaid. Her hand remained beneath mine, neither accepting nor rejecting the contact. "This is complicated," she said softly. We both knew she wasn't talking about the pivot table anymore. The screen's glow painted shadows across her features as she watched me, waiting for my response. "Yes," I agreed, because there was no point denying it. "It is." Something in my acknowledgement seemed to activate her analytical side, the same sharp intelligence I'd admired in countless meetings. I'm 13 years older than you, Daniel. Her voice took on an almost clinical tone, as if presenting data at a board meeting. I'm your direct supervisor. We've both worked incredibly hard to build our careers, to earn respect in this industry. She laid out each point with careful precision, but I noticed her free hand trembling slightly where it rested on the desk. The movement betrayed the emotion. Behind her measured words, the careful wall of logic she was trying to construct had hairline cracks running through it. My throat felt dry. Would you like me to go back to my office? The question hung in the air between us. The silence stretched so long I could hear the building's ventilation system cycling on. A soft white noise that somehow made the moment feel more intimate rather than less. I watched her profile, noting how she drew her lower lip between her teeth, a gesture I'd seen 100 times in difficult negotiations, but never fully appreciated until now. No. The word was barely above a whisper, but it changed. Everything. Her eyes met mine again, determination mixing with vulnerability in her gaze. But we need to talk about what this is. She took a careful breath. What it could cost us, before anything happens. The tremor in her hand had spread to her voice now, just slightly. That tiny wobble in her usual confidence told me more than her words. This mattered to her. She wasn't just trying to let me down gently or protect the company. She was genuinely wrestling with the implications, which meant she'd been thinking about this too. The city lights twinkled beyond her windows, reminding me of the world beyond this office, beyond this moment. A world full of judgment, consequences, and complicated power dynamics. She was right. We needed to talk about all of it. But the fact that she wanted to have that conversation at all made my heart beat faster. My hand was still covering hers on the mouse. Neither of us had moved to break that connection, as if it anchored us in the suspended moment between what we had been to each other and what we might become. The jasmine scent of her perfume mingled with the coffee on her desk, creating a combination I knew would forever remind me of this night. This choice. Those fine lines around her eyes deepened slightly as she watched me process her words. They spoke of wisdom I didn't have, experiences I couldn't match. But they also held a question, an uncertainty that made her seem suddenly more accessible, more real. Not just my brilliant, composed boss, but a woman taking a risk that could change everything. The spreadsheet glowed forgotten on her screen, its neat rows of data a stark contrast to the messy human moment unfolding before it. The pivot table still needed fixing. The presentation still needed finishing. But right now, all that mattered was what we would say next, how we would navigate this delicate new territory we'd stumbled into. I moved my chair back slightly, giving Margaret both physical and emotional space to choose how this conversation would unfold. Something in her posture eased at the gesture, a subtle lowering of her shoulders. It's as if I'd confirmed this wasn't about pressure or power dynamics. The pretense working on tomorrow's presentation evaporated. Margaret turned her chair to face me, the motion deliberate and graceful. In the soft light of her office, she looked both more and less like herself. The executive polish remained, but something deeper emerged beneath it. I was divorced 5 years ago, she began, her fingers tracing an invisible pattern on her desk. He was a venture capitalist, brilliant with money, less brilliant with successful women. The kind of man who says he wants an equal partner until he actually has one. A wry smile touched her lips. Rebuilding in your 40s. It's not just about dating again. It's about remembering who you are when you're not trying to make someone else comfortable with your success. I listened, recognizing the weight of what she was sharing. This wasn't casual disclosure. This was Margaret Chen allowing me to see behind the carefully constructed walls of her professional persona. The ironic part, she continued, her voice softening, is that success only amplifies certain kinds of loneliness. every time we land a major client or close an impossible deal. There's this moment. She paused, searching for words. This moment when everyone's celebrating, and I look around the room thinking, who really sees this? Who understands what it took to get here? Her hands stilled on the desk. Sometimes achievement feels like a house with beautiful rooms no one else ever visits. The vulnerability in her admission caught in my chest. Here was the woman who could silence a boardroom with a raised eyebrow, sharing her private doubts in the midnight quiet of her office. I recognized the trust she was placing in me, the risk she was taking. When she fell silent, I knew it was my turn for honesty. I've watched you handle hostile boardrooms full of men who think they can steamroll you, I said quietly. You never raise your voice, never lose your composure. You just see the whole chessboard while they're still setting up their pieces. I smiled, remembering specific moments. 3 weeks ago, in the Miller negotiation, you anticipated their counteroffer before they even made it. Had the solution ready before they finished speaking. Something shifted in Margaret's expression as she listened, a softening around her eyes. I started looking forward to Monday mornings, I admitted. Not for the work itself, but to watch you tackle whatever impossible problem landed on your desk. The way your mind works. It's like watching someone solve a puzzle no one else can even see the edges of. My words hung in the air between us, more revealing than I'd intended. This wasn't just admiration for her professional capabilities. This was appreciation for the essence of who she was. The quiet brilliance that made her extraordinary. Margaret's face held a new openness as she processed my confessions. The careful, analytical mask she wore in meetings had given way to something more tender, more present. In this moment, we weren't CEO and employee. We were just two people seeing each other clearly for perhaps the first time. I watched her absorb my words, noting how the city lights through her window caught the silver threads in her dark hair, how her fingers had stilled completely on her desk. The late hour and shared honesty had created a bubble around us where titles and age differences seemed less important than this growing understanding between us. The minutes ticked past midnight. As our conversation deepened, each revelation seemed to draw us closer to something inevitable, a precipice we were both approaching with equal parts caution and certainty. The city beyond her office windows had settled into its nighttime rhythm, streets quieter, buildings reduced to patterns of lit windows against the dark. Margaret stood suddenly, though not abruptly. Her movements carried the same deliberate grace I'd watched in countless meetings. But now it felt more personal, less performed. She walked to her window, the same one we'd shared dinner beside hours earlier. Her reflection overlaid the city. Lights creating a double image, the sharp lines of her silhouette against the soft blur of distant buildings. I remained in my chair, understanding instinctively that she needed this moment of distance to think. The office felt suspended in time, like a snow globe just before it's shaken. Even the usual sounds of the building seemed muted, as if everything was holding its breath. If we do this, Margaret spoke to the glass, her voice steady but quiet. It has to be our choice. A real decision. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Not something that just happened because we were tired and lonely and the hour was late. The way she said it, clear-eyed, analytical, was so perfectly her that it made my chest ache. She turned from the window to face me. The Margaret Chen I knew from daylight hours would have already had 3 contingency plans and a risk assessment. Matrix prepared. But this Margaret, the one standing in the gentle darkness of her office past midnight, showed something different in her expression. Openness, vulnerability, possibility. I considered her words carefully. She was right. This couldn't be something we stumbled into and regretted in the morning light. Whatever was building between us deserved more respect than that. More intention, slowly, deliberately. I moved my hand across her desk, palm facing upward. Not reaching, not demanding, offering. The gesture said everything I needed to say. The choice was hers. The pace was hers. The power was hers. I would. Wait. Margaret's gaze fixed on my extended hand. I could almost see her brilliant mind working through every implication, every potential outcome. The space between us felt charged with possibility, like the moment before lightning strikes. Her office seemed to exist in its own pocket of reality, separate from the world of quarterly reports and board meetings. Here, the usual rules of hierarchy and propriety felt distant, less binding. She moved back toward the desk with measured steps. Each click of her heels on the floor marked another moment of consideration, another choice being made. When she reached the edge of her desk, she paused. The city lights caught the curve of her cheek, the elegant line of her neck, the silver at her temples that she never bothered to hide. Then, the same decisive grace she brought to every major decision, Margaret placed her hand in mine. Her fingers were cool and steady against my palm. Her touch neither tentative nor aggressive, simply present and sure. The contact felt monumental, like signing some invisible contract with skin instead of ink. Your place or mine? She asked. The directness of the question catching me off guard. No euphemisms, no dancing around intentions. Just Margaret being Margaret. Clear, straightforward. Unafraid to name things for what they were. The question hung in the air between us, making everything suddenly, startlingly real. Her hand remained in mine, a point of connection that seemed to ground us both in this moment of transition. Whatever came next would change everything. We both knew it. Both chose it anyway. I looked at our joined hands for a moment before suggesting, "Your place might be better." The words came out softer than I intended, but they carried my meaning. We needed somewhere private to figure out this delicate new reality between us. Somewhere away from office chairs and fluorescent lights, somewhere that felt real. Margaret nodded, a slight tilt of her head that conveyed understanding. She'd likely reached the same conclusion herself. Her home would give us the space and privacy. We needed to navigate whatever this was becoming. "Yes," she said simply, withdrawing her hand from mine with gentle purpose. We turned our attention to closing down our workstations, an ordinary routine that felt surreal in this charged moment. I watched as Margaret saved the presentation files. With her usual precision, each click of her mouse deliberate and measured. The familiar sounds of computers shutting down filled the quiet office. These mundane actions seemed to steady us both, giving our hands something to do while our minds processed the weight of our decision. I gathered my laptop and jacket while Margaret collected her things, the motions so familiar from countless late nights, yet entirely different now. She shrugged into her wool coat with practiced grace, then reached for her leather bag. The way she checked her phone and tucked away her reading glasses spoke of years of careful habits, a reminder of the life experience between us. We left her office together, pausing as she entered the security code with quick, sure fingers. The soft beep of the system arming felt unusually loud in the empty hallway. Neither of us spoke as we walked to the elevator. We didn't need to. The air between us hummed with unspoken awareness. In the elevator, Margaret positioned herself, precisely close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her body, but not quite touching. The space between us crackled with potential energy. I watched the floor numbers tick down, each illuminated digit marking another moment closer to whatever waited ahead. The descent seemed to take both forever and no time at all, each floor. A heartbeat, each heartbeat a small eternity. When we reached the parking garage, Margaret turned to me. "I'll drive myself," she said, her voice carrying that blend of authority and gentleness I'd come to know so well. "You can follow me." It wasn't really a question, but it wasn't quite a command either. More like an acknowledgement that we both needed these few minutes alone, a chance to breathe and think before taking the next step. Of course, I agreed, understanding completely. These separate drives would give us each a moment to process, to make sure we were moving forward with clear heads and certain hearts. I watched her walk to her car, her heels echoing against concrete. Before heading to my own vehicle, the familiar motions of starting my car and adjusting my mirrors felt almost comically normal, given the circumstances. I waited until I saw Margaret's silver sedan pull out before following her into the night. The city streets were nearly empty at this hour, traffic lights changing just for us. I kept a respectful distance behind her car, watching her navigate turns with the same confident precision she brought to everything else. Despite the calm of the drive, I could feel my pulse elevated, my hands a little too aware of the steering wheel beneath them. We left the downtown area behind, moving into residential streets lined with mature trees. Margaret's neighborhood, when we reached it, spoke of established comfort, craftsman-style homes with well-tended gardens and deep porches. Her house fit perfectly here, its clean lines and warm wood tones visible even in the darkness. I pulled into her driveway behind her sedan, cutting my engine. The house lights were dark, peaceful. A porch light clicked on. Margaret must have triggered it remotely. The soft glow illuminated brick steps and carefully maintained flower boxes, making the space feel welcoming despite the late hour. Through my windshield, I watched Margaret emerge from her car, her movements unhurried and composed. She stood, for a moment, keys in hand, waiting for me to join her. The night air held that peculiar stillness that comes with important moments. When the world seems to pause and hold its breath, I followed Margaret to her front door, watching as she selected a key from her ring with the same precise movements I'd seen her use to choose strategic priorities and meetings. The porch light cast warm shadows across her face as she unlocked the door, then stepped aside with a gentle gesture for me to enter first. The foyer opened into a space that felt perfectly Margaret, sophisticated but lived in, like walking into a physical extension of her personality. Art pieces hung on the walls, carefully chosen and arranged to create conversation. But what caught my attention were the books. They were everywhere, filling built-in shelves and stacked on side tables, some with elegant bookmarks peeking out from between pages. Margaret reached for a table lamp, and soft light bloomed in the space. The warm glow smoothed the edges of everything, making the moment feel less sharp, more real. We turned to face each other, and I noticed how different she seemed here, in her own space. Without her heels, she was shorter than I expected, and something about that unexpected vulnerability made my chest tighten. You know those moments when everything feels balanced on a knife's edge? When you can feel the weight of a decision pressing against your skin? It's where we stood, in Margaret's foyer, the late hour wrapping around us like a blanket. Are you sure? I had to ask. After everything we've discussed in her office, after all the complications we'd acknowledged, I needed to hear her answer one more time. Here, in this personal space, with no desks or spreadsheets between us, Margaret took her time with the question, considering it with the same thoroughness she brought to quarterly projections. Her eyes met mine, clear and direct. No, she admitted, and I appreciated her honesty even as my heart stumbled. But then she continued, "But I want to be." That confession hung in the air between us, more intimate than any touch could have been. Margaret Chen, who always knew exactly what she wanted, admitting to uncertainty but choosing to move forward anyway. It felt like being trusted with something precious. She stepped closer then, her movement deliberate but not hesitant. Her hand rose to my face, fingers cool against my skin as she traced the line of my jaw. When she kissed me, it started exactly as I might have expected, controlled, measured. Each movement calculated like one of her business strategies. But something shifted as the kiss deepened. The precision that defined Margaret in the boardroom began to soften, giving way to something more raw and honest. Her fingers curled against my neck, and I felt the moment her careful control cracked, replaced by genuine want. The kiss transformed into something real and human and hungry. When we finally separated, we were both breathing differently. The carefully maintained space between us had disappeared. Margaret's eyes were darker when she looked up at me. Her lipstick slightly smudged, a beautiful imperfection I'd never seen before. She reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. Without words, she turned and led me deeper into her house, past the carefully curated art and beloved books. Each step felt deliberate, a choice we were making together. The wood floors whispered under our feet as I followed Margaret through. Her home, her hand warm and certain in mine. Each step felt weighted with meaning, like we were leaving trails of our choices behind us. The living room opened up before us. More books, comfortable furniture that invited you to stay, and large windows that reflected our silhouettes against the night beyond. Margaret squeezed my hand once before letting go. "Water?" she asked, moving to a small bar cart that held both crystal decanters and everyday glasses. I nodded, watching as she filled 2 glasses from a pitcher. Such a simple thing, offering water, but it felt like an anchor, something to hold on to while we navigated these new waters. When she handed me my glass, our fingers brushed. We settled onto her couch, close enough to feel each other's presence, but not quite touching. The space between us hummed with possibility. I've seen Margaret handle million-dollar negotiations without flinching. But now she looked almost fragile as she turned to face me. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked softly. "When we're back in the office, in the harsh fluorescent light of reality." I took a slow sip of water, considering my answer carefully. "I don't know," I admitted, watching her face. "But maybe we could focus on tonight first?" The smile that spread across her face then was something entirely new. Not her boardroom smile or her polite social smile, but something genuine and a little shy. It transformed her whole face, and my breath caught at the sight of it. "Tonight?" she repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes, but we should probably talk about some things first." I set my glass down on a coaster, turning to give her my full attention. "I'm listening." What followed was possibly the most mature conversation I've ever had about desire. Margaret spoke about boundaries, both professional and personal. We discussed what we each needed, what we were comfortable with, what might need to remain private. Rather than dampening the electricity between us, each honest exchange seemed to charge the air further. "I need you to understand," Margaret said, her voice low and serious, "that this isn't casual for me." "I don't do casual anymore." "Neither do I," I assured her, and watched some tension leave her shoulders. We talked about consent, not just for tonight, but for all the complicated days that might follow. About how either of us could step back at any point, no questions asked. About the importance of clear communication, especially given our professional relationship. Finally, Margaret set her glass down and stood. The lamplight caught the silver threads in her dark hair as she extended her hand to me once more. This time, when our fingers intertwined, we both knew exactly what it meant. Every step had been discussed, every boundary acknowledged. There was nothing left to hide behind. She led me through her home until we reached her bedroom doorway. There, she paused, turning to face me. Even in the dim light, I could read every emotion crossing her face. This was our final moment to choose, to step forward into something new or step back into our familiar roles. Margaret's eyes met mine, clear and certain. I squeezed her hand gently, and together we chose to cross that threshold. Morning crept in like a shy visitor, the sunlight filtering through Margaret's dove-gray curtains in gentle ribbons. I woke slowly, taking in the unfamiliar angles of her bedroom, the sophisticated minimalism that spoke of careful choices. The space beside me was empty, but still held a trace of warmth, From somewhere in the house came the soft sounds of movement. Cabinet doors opening, ceramic against countertop. The distinctive gurgle of a coffee maker beginning its morning ritual. I found my clothes where we'd carefully draped them the night before, dressed quietly, and followed the promising aroma of fresh coffee. I paused in the kitchen doorway, taking in the sight of Margaret in a charcoal silk robe that fell just past her knees. She stood at her coffee maker, one of those precision instruments with multiple settings, measuring grounds with the same exactness she brought to quarterly projections. Her hair was pulled back in a loose knot, revealing the elegant line of her neck. When she looked up and saw me, time seemed to pause. This was the moment I'd wondered about. Would daylight bring regret? Would we struggle to meet each other's eyes? But Margaret's face softened into a small, private smile that seemed to answer all those unspoken questions. Without a word, she reached for a second mug. I watched as she prepared my coffee, black, no sugar, and realized she must have noticed this detail about me somewhere along the way, probably during countless morning meetings. The thought warmed me more than any coffee could. She slid the mug across the granite countertop. When our fingers brushed during the transfer, neither of us pulled away. That simple touch carried weight, an acknowledgement that last night wasn't. A mistake wasn't something to be filed away and forgotten. We drank our coffee in comfortable silence, the morning light growing stronger around us. I studied her over the rim of my mug, noting how different she looked here in her home. Softer, somehow, but no less compelling. The Margaret who commanded boardrooms was still there. But now I knew this other version of her too. The one who hummed quietly while measuring coffee grounds. "The board presentation is in 3 hours," she said finally, her voice carrying no regret, just a practical acknowledgement of reality. We would need to step back into our professional roles, navigate the complex dance of maintaining boundaries in public. While knowing what we now knew about each other, I reached across the counter, drawn by some new gravity between us, and touched her hand. She turned her palm up immediately, interlacing our fingers. The gesture felt like acceptance of this new reality we'd created, of the complications we'd knowingly chosen of each other. The morning light caught the steam rising from our coffee mugs, creating brief, beautiful patterns that disappeared as quickly as they formed. But our hands remained connected, steady and sure in this quiet morning moment, grounding us in our choice. If this kept you company, tap, subscribe, and leave. One line that resonated. I read them all, and your words shape the next story.